Hello, everybody, and welcome to Practical Wisdom. Season 1 is focusing on facing the fear of success. I'd like to welcome Ashley Rainsbarger, our subconscious growth coach. So say hi to everyone. Ashley, how are you doing today?
Hey, guys. How's everybody? Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm so glad in the midst of all the things people have going on, you have the time to come in. So I'm really excited about this particular series because as a subconscious growth coach, I actually have interacted with you some on this topic, and a lot of people have a lot of different fears that hold them back from being their best self or being a success. And so I'm curious, in your role as a coach, have you seen that too? Have you seen people's fears kind of getting in the way of their success? And if so, how?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So what I really notice and why I'm so passionate about what I do is that, bottom line, especially like for my audience who happens to be coaches like me, we're really service driven. We have a real deep passion to serve other people. We're, my clients, my potential clients, the people in my audience are always really smart, that, they're brilliant. They have all this drive. And so when they're not succeeding at something, it's not because they don't know how to do it. It's because they're not doing it. And they're making up all these excuses about why they're not doing it or not taking certain steps. But bottom line is it comes down to a certain fear. It comes down to a fear of being visible in one way or another, especially like as virtual coaches, or it comes down to really like a fear of rejection, because there are actually a lot of people who work online and are really visible and who you might think are really successful, but they're too afraid to make an offer. They're too afraid to invite to a call, or they're just too afraid to do something that feels like, well, this might be a case in which I might get rejected. And so we listen to those voices in our head that tell us that gives us all these reasons why we can't or shouldn't do something, or why we're different from other people. And then we don't do the things that lead to what we really want. And so we just kind of walk in circles. It's not that we don't know how to do it, that people don't know how in most cases. It's just that we're not doing it because of the fear.
So you mentioned fear of visibility. And I think there's what I've seen is there's what everyone thinks of as visibility, which is like standing on stage, right? Hey, and like they're like, I'm afraid of public speaking. But is that all that means to you? Is visibility just about being physically present, or is there more to fearing being visible?
Yeah. No, it doesn't just mean being in front of other people. A lot of times when I'm talking about visibility, and I've had to really kind of think about this in my marketing, because I know that when I talk about visibility, that's exactly what people think of. But when it comes to being visible, there really are two aspects of it. There is being visible in front of people, right? And that might mean putting out content online, or it might mean doing a live, or it might mean speaking, or it might mean, just having a one-to-one conversation with somebody, which can be really, sometimes is harder for people than actually getting in front of a group of people. So there's the aspect of visibility where we're in front of other people and we have to be a little more vulnerable. We have to be willing to ask questions. And then there's the other part of visibility in which you have to get really visible with yourself, right? You have to ask yourself those inner questions around, well, why am I not experiencing what I want to be experiencing, or what I think I should be experiencing right now? Because I really encourage my clients to, and myself and all the work that I've done, is we have to take responsibility for what we've created in our life or what we haven't created in our life. And I think if we're not experiencing what we want to be, we have to ask ourselves, how have I kept myself from it? And that's what it means to really be self-visible.
That's interesting. So be responsible for what you've created and what you've not created, right? So there's like kind of two sides to that. And so the other one, so I love that, and maybe we can dig into the fear of visibility a little again in a moment. But you also said there's this fear of rejection, and I've heard others talk about there's like kind of a couple types of fear. There's this fear of not being worthy, right? There's this fear of not belonging. there's a fear of loss. So there's all of these things that we're essentially worried about, like in the future happening. But how does fear of rejection show up for you and your clients? Like, what are you seeing out there?
Hmm. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the subconscious mind and all fear that we experience, as coaches or as just a regular human being, it always comes down to like, I'm not enough. So when we're talking about fear visibility, it might mean I'm not enough, as a coach, I'm not enough to post content to give advice to people. Right? It might be at that level. Or I'm not enough to go live and to be on video and to let other people hear me speak, and I'm not worthy of being listened to. Or it might mean that, I'm not good enough to walk my clients from A to B. I'm not good enough to really serve them and help them get the outcome that they want. I'm not good enough to have just a one-on-one conversation. It's sometimes just terrifying to get on the call and have the one-on-one conversation. So it is a fear of like visibility and rejection, but that fear of rejection comes from they're going to reject me because I'm not enough. And it really has nothing to do with what other people think of you. It has everything to do with what you think of yourself. I mean, for example, I always like to say, if somebody ever told me that I was a purple giraffe, that wouldn't offend me because I'm not a purple giraffe, right? Like you can call me a purple giraffe all day long and it's not going to hurt my feelings because I am not a purple giraffe, and I know that to be true about myself. So whenever somebody does call you something or makes you feel uncomfortable or makes you feel small, you have to really turn that inward and ask yourself, well, why does it make me feel small? What do I believe to be true about myself that would allow their words to make me feel this way? Did that answer the question?
Of course. Yeah, it was a very in-depth response.
Good.
So with all of those different fears and kind of the I'm not enough, one of the things we really were hoping to do a little differently with the Practical Wisdom podcast was being able to give people some practical strategies to overcome this fear of success. So and it doesn't really matter to me whether it's visibility or rejection, just in general, what are some tips or some exercises that you've concocted or found or learned about that might help others sort of overcome some of these I'm not enough type fears?
Mm-hmm. I have a couple things that I think would be really helpful. Number one, just on a basic level, start to become really super aware of the way that you're thinking about yourself and the way that you're speaking about yourself. Because, I just had a conversation with a client yesterday where she was feeling really frustrated about, I still keep having these thoughts. I still keep having these fears. And it's okay that you do. I've done a ton of mindset work, a ton of like energetic healing, and I still have the negative thoughts. And we're always going to have the fear. What matters is what you do with it. What matters is how you choose to respond. So number one, just start to be aware. When you think something really negative about yourself, or when you find yourself speaking something really negative, and just allow yourself to choose again. Allow yourself, that's something that Gabrielle Bernstein talks about. Just allow yourself to choose a new thought. Allow yourself to pause and reflect and choose something different to say about yourself. The other thing that I think is super helpful, because oftentimes like what fear does is it just clogs our mind with just so much chaos. And what we end up doing is just spinning in emotional circles, and we don't ever take that energy and do anything with it. So it's just exhausting. And if instead we would take time to just sit down and write out a list of the fears, write out a list of the things that you are worrying about right now. And it can be something huge and impossible like world hunger. I know, like, I find myself worrying about that at 3:00 in the morning. Or it can be something very specific, in your business. If you're working on creating client, you don't know when your next client is going to come. Take a moment and write down all the fears and all the worries that you're currently experiencing. Go back through that list and cross off all the ones that you can't do anything about. Like world hunger, for example, I could make a donation, right? But beyond that, like I'm not able to solve that on my own. That's not something that is serving me to hold on to. So I'm going to cross that off, and I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm just going to say, I let that go. And that's really energetically very healing for you to just recognize that and let it go. For all the other things that you can do something about, that you do have control over, just write down one tiny action step right next to that item. And just allow yourself to recognize, hey, I actually do have control. There actually is something to do. What is the very next best, smallest thing that I can do to move closer to my goal and just kind of relieve that fear and that anxiety that I'm experiencing?
Yeah, I love that one. I know I recently went to one of the, Let It Go was the song, right, from the first Frozen.
Yeah.
But what I really loved was actually the second Frozen movie, and it talked a whole lot about what's the next best step, right? What's the next right step?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily, and that's for our little kids, but it's good for us as adults to look at. We don't have to solve all the things. Just look at solving the thing that you have right in front of you right now. And
Yes.
I think that, I mean, we talk about, what are some options for facing the fear of success, or how do we get toward that? But that might seem like too big. And so instead of like, how do I become a success? How do I get the next client? How do I do all that? A friend of mine calls them lead indicators versus lag indicators. It's like a lag indicator is you want to lose 60 pounds and you go on the scale and you look at it every day. But the lead indicator is that you walked, that you ate a healthy food, that you drank water. And so maybe that there's an opportunity to, if you find yourself in fear for the big task ahead, that just identify one lead indicator that you can look at, and that's your next right step. Not all of them, just the next one.
I think that's such an important point, because what we all do is we get so attached to this big picture of where we're supposed to be. A lot of times, like when I'm talking about coaching, and I just shared this visual the other day, but I think that coaches live in three places. They live in not enough land, they live in a really good place to be land, or they live in, coaching dreamland. And a lot of us are trying to move from not enough land all the way over to dreamland. And we're forgetting the place in between that we have to get to first, which is just a really good place to be. And in order to get to a really good place to be, which isn't everything you want, but it's a lot better than where you are, in order to get to that place, we have to be willing to take the action through the fear. We just have to be willing to do one step at a time and let go of that big picture and just ask myself, how can I get a little closer?
Yeah, I love that. I remember one thing. So one of our daughters has some challenges being on the spectrum, and sometimes you can feel a bit overwhelming with all of the things that she has to do and she has to learn. But what we really focus on is just what is the skill right now that we can teach her. And her life is better because she can type now, but she still can't write. Does that mean she's failed? Well, no, the goal was to communicate.
Yeah.
The goal wasn't to write. The goal was to be able to express herself. And so we often say in our home that it's not about getting over the fear. It's about being brave and doing it scared.
Yes.
Because you're going to have to do it anyway. And so oftentimes I say she's my hero because, I mean, everything she does almost every day is terrifying. And every single day she does it anyway. And not to get to this dreamland of a perfect kid that is going to do all the things that we always thought she would do when she was in my tummy, but to get to a place where it's a good place to be, right? It's a good
and we
place
get to decide Like we get to
Yeah.
decide what is that really good place and what is that dreamland, you know? Like you get to pick. You are the boss. This is your life. This is your rules. You know, letting go of comparing ourselves to everybody else because we are all so unique and special. And so we get to choose what that really good place is.
Now that's an interesting comment. So letting go of comparing yourself to
Mm-hmm.
others. That's easy to say. So I just want to kind of come back to it because this is practical wisdom versus,
Yeah.
ethereal or something like that. What's some opportunity or some step or the next step you can take to do that? Because I find myself very easily getting into that trap of, well, Ashley's got this hugely successful practice, or she's look how clean her house is and she has kids at home too. Like all of those kinds of things where, we say we compare and despair. But is there something actionable that we can go, okay, I recognized I was doing that. Now what?
Mm. You know, I don't think that there's an exercise that helps with that, but what I always try to remember is to have empathy for people because you get to see everything that you get to see, everything that I choose to put out, right? But you don't get to see what I don't choose to put out. You don't get to see the rest of my life. And I try to remember that, like, because I'll have a syndrome comparison syndrome when it comes to my mentors. And I'll think, oh, what will they think about what I write? Or what will they think about what I post or what I'm doing or what I'm saying? And at the end of the day, like we have all been through something. Like even if you had a pretty good childhood, which honestly a lot of people are traumatized in some way or another, even if you had a pretty good life, like being human is just traumatizing. Just living on this planet is a really hard thing to do. Um, One of my favorite entrepreneurs, Nick Peterson, he says that you can't give birth to an adult. And so you have to really remember, what am I comparing myself to? Am I comparing my journey to somebody else who's been on the same journey for 10 years longer than I have? You know what I mean? So, and even then, even if you're at the exact same place in the journey that you're on, you have not experienced the same things. You don't have the same circumstances. And you may get to see the really happy part of our life, of someone's life, but you don't get to see the really, really hard part because as humans, we we fear putting that out there. We fear being really vulnerable. We fear being really honest. So you're seeing a lot, but just remember that there's a lot that you're not seeing.
Yeah, I think that's more than fair. I remember when a couple of people that I'd worked with for a very long time found out my daughter was on the spectrum, and they're like, we would have never known. You seem like you have the world by the balls and you have
Yes.
everything together. And I'm like, awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I'm barely holding on, but thanks a lot, guys. One exercise I've tried, and it may not work for everyone, is when I catch myself comparing myself to others. Um, if I can't do it at that moment, later what I'll do is I'll write down my now, who
Mm,
I'm being now, and then who I want to be showing up as, right?
yeah.
And then the gap becomes the action I can take.
Mm,
And so it makes me feel that there's an active way to shift from the
yeah.
being that I'm in, that I don't love maybe at that moment, to that action that I do. And so, for example, which, because we used earlier, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just love how clean your house always looks. Maybe I'm feeling like badly because I think that I should have a cleaner house, or I really want one. Not, I don't like the shame game, but
Mm-hmm.
well, the gap is cleaning up something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's super simple, but instead of all this shame and what do I do and I can never be, well, I might not be like you, but if I aspire to be like the new me, and that means that, I don't have laundry on the bed everywhere, then I can take an action.
Mm,
Uh, but I try to shift it out of that perspective of the envy of the other
yeah.
person and bring it back to, well, why are you in that place then?
Yeah,
and
absolutely. It's like self-reflection. Like why instead of because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll put it on the other person, like, oh, why are they so awesome and blah blah blah, even though I'm over here thinking like, oh my god, I have a bunch of laundry on my dresser, or which I don't right now, but normally I do. but a lot of times we put it on the other person, and instead what's really helpful is, like you said, like, why is this causing me to feel a certain way? Like, what about this is triggering me? Well, it's triggering you because it's something that you want. And so you're right, like, you just get to take like a simple action, and then you have it, and instead of just letting it be the story that plays over and over.
Yeah. Because I mean, another thing with the comparing yourself to others, which was, I guess maybe I'm getting older or wiser, but I remember always like looking at people of certain reason I'm comparing and like, oh my gosh, she's so thin, or she's so young, or she's so this, or she's so that. And when I started doing this, me to the aspiration of me, what I found out was I didn't even want to be that thing. And that was actually a pretty big surprise for me, because I thought I was very in tune, and that I was very empathetic, and I always gave people a good shake. But I was actually comparing myself to a person that I didn't want that skill. I didn't want that attribute. I didn't want to be that way. And so then I did have to kind of step back and go,
Yeah.
that's a jealousy thing. What are you actually jealous of? Which became something different than the fear conversation. But I think there's always that opportunity to, with the very first thing you said was step one of getting out of fear, is to become super aware of what you're saying or thinking about yourself. And I think maybe number two is considering what you're saying or thinking about others that you want, checking in and seeing if you really do,
Yes, because there's a big difference between what I actually want and what I think I should have, because of, again, everybody around us. We have to be careful of like those, well, I should have this and I should have that because Sally down the street has it or whatever. And that just goes back to comparison syndrome, and it's not actually what we truly desire. So it becomes important then to get really connected with, no, what do I really want? Like, what I want is okay.
Yeah, and I love that you brought it up, because the one thing I talk about a lot, probably because it makes me laugh, is like, we really do have to quit shoulding on ourselves and others. I mean, there's no should. You just do or you don't, right? It's like,
Exactly.
I think my mom was a really amazing cook. She's an amazing cook. So all my life I thought I should make breakfast, I should make this healthy lunch, I should make dinner this thing. I hate to cook though. I hate to cook. I have no desire whatsoever to do anything in the kitchen. My husband, on the other hand, loves to cook, loves it. But for years, we've been married 20 years. For years, I'm like in there, all right, ticked off, right, making this food. And he's like thinking, gosh, I could just make it, you jerk, right? And we're doing all of this dance. And when I finally stopped shooting on myself and said, well, I don't like this, and he does, what can we do about that? So it was interesting. So definitely one way to move from stuck to success through fear is examining your shoulds and seeing if they are.
Yes, because we don't want to end up like at the end of that with a whole life around everything we thought we should do and not around anything that we actually wanted. And that's what happens when you don't get really clear with, what do I actually want? How do I actually feel? What actually matters to me?
Awesome. I love it. So basically what I've heard us kind of go through is there's kind of two reasons that we have fear of visibility, right? As being in front of people, and then self-visibility, which I think is really insightful, kind of the I'm not enough and I'm not worthy. And then there were a bunch of practical tips you gave, start with awareness, and then allowing a new thought, which is super beautiful. I think we forget to give ourselves permission a lot. And then sit and write out your fears, and then cross out the ones you literally can't do anything about.
Stop carrying around.
Stop that. And there's letting go of comparing yourself to others. There's a lot of other nuggets in there. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure that we really addressed about overcoming fear of success, or overcoming your fear so you can move in the direction that you want to move into?
I think just be really aware of like what actual success looks like to you, because again, it's going to look very different for you than it looks like for another person. And maybe once you get really clear around what that actually looks like what the big picture of success is, it's probably going to feel a lot less scary, because it's not what you think that other people are experiencing. Because I really think of success as, okay, maybe I'm making a certain amount of money, but it's not really fun to experience that money unless I'm also experiencing a really high amount of joy. And so success to me is not just financial, it's the way that you feel internally. So we're not just working towards things and towards money and towards houses and cars, but we're working towards, how do I want to feel? What kind of impact do I want to have? And in order to get there, what kind of work do I need to do on myself so that, experiencing that isn't scary? It actually is a really awesome place to be.
That is such a great point, and I'm glad that you touched on it before we wrapped up, because I found the kind of the beginning of changing my thoughts was when I started redefining everything.
Yeah.
And one of the first places I started with was the idea of success. And I was trying to aspire to a level of success that my 19-year-old self wanted.
Mm.
But I'm in my 40s now, and I have 4 children. I have this different life. And of course it was scary to try to achieve being the next CTO by the age of 30, because A, I was already past that. B, that's a lot of work. And
Mm.
I didn't actually want it anymore.
Yeah.
So it was scary, right? It was completely petrifying, because it was, oh, how do I get to this thing that I have never even defined the first time?
Mm.
And,
Yes.
and so I was like, well, what does success look like? Similar to what you said. And I found my own definition, and then wonderful surprise. I found I was already there, which was a
Mm.
really cool.
That is so awesome.
Yeah. So it's definitely a great, great thing. So thank you so much for spending time with us today on Practical Wisdom. You've given us so many actionable steps to help us break through the fear and move toward what we define as success. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again soon, Ashley.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for letting me be here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.